Imagine spending your summer not just watching English cricket live, but doing so in style. Introducing Seat Unique, the go-to destination for premium event access from the England-India Test Series to this summer's T20s and the 100. Elevate every match day with delicious food and drinks packages, world-class service and private balcony seating with unbeatable views of the action. In hospitality, it's not just cricket, it's a memory waiting to happen. Head to seatunique.com today and secure the ultimate fan experience. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. India, against all odds, are the 2025 Champions Trophy winners. They reasserted their current limited overs dominance, going back-to-back in ICC major tournaments and extending their formidable recent record at ICC major tournaments to 23 wins from their last 24 games. There's more chat around who will be the next England ODI captain, who may well be Harry Brook, who has since pulled out of the IPL, doing so for the second year in a row and potentially leaving him vulnerable to a ban from the competition. There's more chaos in Pakistan, some retirement news, and some of your questions at the end of the show. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today are Mark Butcher and Ben Gardner. Ben, if you had to choose an adjective to describe the final yesterday, what are you going with?
Is at arm's length an adjective? I don't know. Comprehensive. It felt a bit like. Do you remember the first Incredibles movie where I didn't think we get into this early, but Dash, the one who's really fast, is entered into that race, and he's like his parents sort of cheering him on, but saying like, "Don't go too fast because then it will kind of expose the farce of the whole thing." And that's what watching India in the semi-finals and finals has been a little bit like. There's been a little bit of almost of making a game of it. I mean, there was a period during that, during the middle overs of India's innings, I think, where there was a pretty tight squeeze that New Zealand were applying. And I think thoughts would have just drifted back to what it felt like during that World Cup final, where there was, an even tighter squeeze. There was that massive boundaryless stretch. And I think that those thoughts would have just been just below the surface for India. But really, this whole tournament, they've just been like that far ahead that they've been able to, have those quieter passages and still just, be at a distance better than every team they've come up against, I guess.
But how did you see it? I did for a minute think that New Zealand had a real chance there in the middle overs because India were going nowhere.
Yeah. I mean, inevitable would be the adjective I'd use because India have just far and away been the best team in the tournament without any question. But you're right, there was a little bit of a fight back from New Zealand. I suppose that the one regret from them is that it hadn't happened maybe 30 or 40 runs sooner. By the time the two wickets fell in quick succession, Kohli's dismissal, etc., had happened, they already had the finishing line in sight. New Zealand, fabulously well captained side, well drilled, very professional, hung in there as long as they possibly could. The fielding, ironically, was the thing that perhaps let them down in the final, having been pretty spectacular and safe, if you can put those two words in the same sentence, throughout the rest of it. Glenn Phillips' wonder catch aside. But in the end, India won it. It looks close if you look at the scorecard, but that they won it with plenty left in the tank, sir. So, it was... I think it was a good tournament. They're blighted a little bit by the weather at times. We didn't kind of get to see the group stages come to full fruition. But, the Champions Trophy being a quick tournament, a small amount of games, best against the best, it generally provides good entertainment and good cricket. And for the most part, it did. But India just too damn good. That is it, really. End of story.
And a massive blow for New Zealand before the start of the final as well. Matt Henry, their standout bowler, ruled out with an injury. What I thought was quite interesting from a New Zealand perspective in this game is that you can really see that they are trying to do different things at different times. They're very deliberate. So at the start, they knew how good India spinners were. When they played that game in the group stage, India spinners completely dominated the New Zealand batters. So New Zealand came firing out of the blocks, knowing that those first few overs against the seamers might be their best bet for scoring quick runs. And it works initially. They're going at 7 runs and over after the first 7. But it's the spinners who pin New Zealand back. Kuldeep Yadav gets Ravindra with his first ball. He gets Williamson in his second over. Varun Chakravarti picks up a couple of really important wickets too. And then alongside them, Axar and Jadeja, just so difficult to get away. There was an 81 ball period where New Zealand didn't score a boundary. I think it took them 23 overs to get, I think they scored 70 runs from the 23 overs after the power play as well. And I was sort of thinking, watching it, that the Indian spin quartet are almost like a less sexy version of the West Indies quicks from the 80s in terms of how dominant they
Get
are.
through their
and how
overs
they
faster.
that's true as well. But what makes them so good, obviously in subcontinental conditions, you get to see them bowl more than they would elsewhere. But they have been so hard to get away, Axar and Jadeja, and Kuldeep and Varun. I know Varun's only just started ODI cricket, but he looks like as much of a wicket-taking threat as any spinner in the world at the moment.
What do they do well? They bowl it relatively quickly, the two left-arm spinners. Keep the stumps in play all of the time. And very, very rarely give you a sort of a release ball. I mean, that's pretty much the size of it. And it's like a stranglehold, isn't it? It's like some sort of constrictor just squeezing the life out of batting lineups through the middle. And the risk taking because of the accuracy and the angle left arm, particularly to the right handers, driving the ball in towards middle and leg stump. Even with the four fielders out, the ball very rarely gets flighted, so they're not offering you the opportunity to come down and go over the top. The level of risks that has to be taken in order to just go at sixes, perhaps to score one boundary and over, kind of scares the crap out of teams and batters, and it makes it very, very difficult for them to keep the scoreboard moving. Rohit will keep the field in, keep mid off and mid wicket and extra cover in, nice and tight, nice and straight. So the batters, in order to knock the ball past them just for one, have to open or close the blade in order to do so. And the whole thing just works like clockwork for them. They're very, very good. I mean that's pretty much the size of it.
Yeah.
It's just how much they complement each other as well. And I mean, this tournament has been kind of about, well, Varun Chakravarti's been the revelation. Kuldeep's kind of done his thing, but I thought the final was just Jadeja. And when there's talk during the game that it could be his last ODI, he's put up an Instagram story which suggests he's going to keep carrying on, which I think is the right decision. I mean, you can't, Akshar's sort of come in and you might think he's the long-term successor, but really you've seen in this tournament how much they can kind of fit into the same side and the extraordinary balance it gives you. 'Cause I guess the other thing about the attack early on, it's not just that you get those runs early on, it's that you force them to bring in the spinners earlier. So you might think you get some more over the seam later on, but actually it's 40 overs of spin that they can bowl. So it doesn't really, it's not like it even helps you loads in that regard. And Jadeja, what was it? 1 for 30 in 10 overs? That's that's match winning stuff really. And that's the kind of thing that he just does sort of routinely, completely under the radar, just not missing not bowling a bad ball. And, it's hard enough to hit him for singles, let alone boundaries. I guess, would New Zealand look back and think, because I guess the one thing about Henry's injury is it did mean they had a slightly longer batting lineup because you had Nathan Smith in that tail. Would they look at that Mitchell innings perhaps and think they could have gone a bit harder? But I think that's just, there's so much hindsight in that, and it's so much easier said than done to say, like, can you just go at, a strike rate of 80 against, the most constricting spin quartet that ODI cricket has almost ever seen, basically.
I thought that if England were in New Zealand's position, they'd have been 140 all out. So when there's a lot of people saying Mitchell was going too slowly, it could have, that innings after the 3 quick wickets could easily have fallen apart. And Mitchell, I know it looks slow, relatively speaking, on the scorecard, but without that innings, they don't get anywhere near 250.
They had a chance, as you've already mentioned, they had a glimmer of a chance by applying their own squeeze through the middle with only 250 to defend, And yes, you can make the argument another 10, 15, it could have been very interesting indeed. But India's bowling attack and Rohit as captain will do their absolute utmost to make it impossible for you to get that many. I mean, that's why they're a good team. It's not necessarily a case that the other team's intent wasn't ferocious enough. It's the fact that they are being squeezed and squeezed and squeezed, And in the end, you 250, you kind of think, well done, which was an absolute sort of indication of how brilliantly India controlled things throughout that entire 50 overs.
And Ben, it looked like India were going to romp home after the first 15 or so overs of the run chase. Rohit does his thing in the power play. And even when New Zealand bring on Ravindra and Santner, they looked very comfortable. They got to 105 without any alarms being raised. And then suddenly New Zealand get back into the game. But in hindsight, how important was Rohit's innings? Not just the number of runs he scored, but how quickly he went. Because it meant that when New Zealand were on top, the run rate was never out of control for India because of how quickly they started.
They'd got it down to 4s by then or something, hadn't they? So, they had plenty of breathing space.
Yeah, and it went up to 7s at one point, and it didn't go out of control because of Rohit, basically.
Yeah, and this is what Rohit's done, since the start of the 2023 World Cup, and it's like, it's hard to overstate how impressive that is, really. Like from loads of points of view. One is that he's the senior guy in the team. That's him taking on the captaincy. And being like, obviously, we talk about captaincy might give you a hit in your returns because of all the pressure and everything else. But he's saying, like, I'm going to take the hit as well in terms of I'm going to go really, really hard to beat. It's the selfless thing. And it's also showing the others how he wants it taken on. And also just how you see, careers generally progress, especially in white ball cricket when you get to an older age. Like we've seen with say, Kohli in this tournament, you can get players who they're so experienced and so kind of game hardened that they know how they can kind of keep churning out those runs, but they might lose sort of a touch of that dominance. I think it is rare that you get someone get to that stage in their career and be like, unfurl a completely new side of the game, because that was never Rohit, really. That was that whole top 3 were kind of get set and explode guys, and maybe Shikhar Dhawan would be the one who would take it on going back a bit. And for Rohit to do that, like that is really what is, I think that kind of is, there's lots of personnel stuff as well. Bumrah's amazing. How they can balance that side now with Akshar at 5 gives them, options and depth like no other. But one of the main things that's taken them from being, a very good ODI side to an all-time great one, that one game in that World Cup accepted, is how Rohit has changed his approach, which kind of allows everyone else to do the jobs that they feel most confident in their batting order.
I think it's also a very different thing for subcontinental batters to do, is to play it, unless you're Shikhar Dhawan or you're what's his name?
Sehwag,
Virender Sehwag, whose entire game was that, to go out and dominate. I think for the other guys who are looking at average 50, how personal milestones and those averages and stuff are worth so much more in terms of personal gratification and personal. How would you say?
Did you feel like when you were playing that Indian players were more aware of what they're averaging, etc., compared to maybe other teams?
I also think that's lauded a lot more. I mean, that was the word I was searching for, was that kind of, the way that they are held up on a pedestal for those numbers. And Rohit basically has said, well, that they're of no consequence whatsoever if we're not winning games, winning tournaments, proving that our dominance in terms of depth and in terms of experience and in terms of skill is not turning itself into consequential wins and tournament victories and stuff. And so that's quite a change. If you look across the border to Pakistan, and sort of the accusations that have always been levelled at somebody like Babar or Rizwan, the senior players in those sides who might average 50 or whatever it might be in 50 over cricket, but then you look, well, what have you got to show for it in terms of your team's dominance? That's where the shift has come in terms of Rohit and the way that he's decided to do it. And you could argue actually it's easier to do as captain. You're not getting left out. You're not going to, people might give you a bit of stick, and Sunny Gavaskar gave him a bit of stick for sort of playing wild shots and not going out there and making big hundreds. However, when you look at it and the way that he's playing, plus the abilities of the rest of the batting lineup, you've got somebody who is pretty much unimpeachable going out there and trying to give his team an edge. It might affect his overall stats at the end of his career, but he doesn't give a crap. He's got trophies, and that's what matters.
The stats are pretty good anyway.
They are pretty good.
I'm glad you mentioned Gavaskar, actually, because there was an extraordinary video that emerged from the final celebrations of Gavaskar on Indian TV, like running off and doing a dance. I genuinely thought that might be AI, but I'm assured it wasn't. It was a side to Sonny G that I don't think I've ever seen before. Adam asked, do you think we're about to see a long period of dominance from India in white ball cricket? Ben, do you want to take that?
I I don't think so. I mean, well, partly I think we're already in it when you look at that.
Yes.
23 out of 24. I do think that, as brilliant as they have been, not to get into the conditions of here versus Pakistan, I think they also would have maybe been this dominant if they hadn't played in Pakistan. But conditions in both places have been suited to that brand of cricket. I think the balance on their side is exceptional, but Akshar and Jadeja, there would be conditions where, two finger spinners who, are relying on accuracy more than other stuff. There are conditions when you might be able to get on top of those. And it's possible that the next World Cup in South Africa is one of those, and they might need a slightly different game plan. I mean, look, they've got all the seamers
Not if they
to
play
call
on the
upon.
pitches they played in the SA20. They won't. You put them down for a win there and all.
that is a very good point. Yeah. So, but I do think that, and also, this is cricket. I think that we might be seeing dominance in terms of, they will win lots of bilateral series. They will be the best side in the world for a long period of time. Whether that translates to winning every World Cup played from here on out is a different question, because you've seen in this tournament, even in that stretch where New Zealand had the wood over India, that like finals cricket is just different, and that's the beauty kind of tournament players, that you can be the best team all the way through, get to a final, and all of a sudden you sort of you tense up. Someone has a good day in the opposition, and you start thinking about, oh God, what if how good we are doesn't count for anything. India have they've got that monkey off their back a little bit, but like I think it's I hesitate to say that they're going to have the dominance we've seen Australia have in women's cricket. I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I guess. Well, they have won 2 in a row, and the next major tournament is a T20 World Cup in India and Sri Lanka. So they'll start that one as favourites.
That looks pretty good. I mean, I suppose I would say yes to the initial question. I think we could see the next 2 world events be dominated by India in T20s and 50 over cricket. But I would also point out that England held a 50 over title and a 20 over title both at the same time, and then it all went horribly wrong from there. There are plenty of things that can unfold. Not least, Australia will have. You would imagine that they would have much more of their top players to pick from. You would also imagine that there are going to be retirements and whatever else occurring for India over the next 3 or 4 years too, which is not to say they're not going to be replaced by equally brilliant players. But, a lot of things can change. But I think for now they are unquestionably the team to beat in the next 2 tournaments.
The other thing as well, just which boosts the case that India could be dominant, is if you just look at the other teams around the world, I guess. Like I thought it was interesting, the reaction in South Africa to their semi-final defeat, which seemed to not be as sort of histrionic and upset as there has been in previous times. And actually, I think that like they could well be coming to the end, at least for some of these players. You look, Bavuma's 34, I think. Miller is he's older than Steve Smith, who's just retired. Van der Dussen is 36. They obviously have guys coming through to replace them. I think there is like a bit of a core of that side that will either be like right at the end of the next World Cup or possibly gone by. And I know it's a home World Cup for them. You look at, Australia with Smith going, England obviously in big transition. New Zealand, I guess they will have a lot of players in that sweet spot still then, but I guess they'll be, the Kane Williamsons, will they still be around? So I think that it could be that 2027 World Cup sees, from the sounds of it, the likes of Rohit, Kohli, Jadeja still around, and the rest of the sides, or a lot of the other possible contenders, may be in a bit of a transitional state, which might mean that India have a slightly easier time, I guess, but it's a long time away.
For 2 years in a row, our Champions Trophy partners, WPA Health Insurance, have been the only which recommended health insurance provider in the UK, offering a variety of options for individuals, families and companies of all sizes across the UK. WPA is a long-standing partner of Somerset County Cricket Club and are open to anyone looking to review their health insurance. Our WPA moment of the week is a moment that I thought was very reminiscent of the dying moments of the 2019 World Cup finals. There's an amazing period yesterday where I thought India just completely froze. So 23 balls, there was 1 scoring shot. There were 2 maidens in a row, and you could see Rohit in particular looking a little bit frustrated, and he thought, hang on, I need to put some pressure back on the bowlers here. And he goes for a big shot, he's out. The dot balls keep coming, and you could see the same thing happening again with Shreyas Iyer and Axar Patel. Iyer goes for a massive shot. Will Young gets a hand on it, it goes for 6. If that's not hit quite as far, if it's 2 yards less well hit, and he's out, at that point in the game, India are less than halfway there, 4 down and behind the rate. That was a massive moment. Absolutely huge moment. And we talked about this before we started recording, but I think one of the things I like about watching 50 over cricket and 50 over finals is I think players have much more to grapple with mentally compared to T20 cricket. In a T20 game, even if it is a final, you just know you have to go quite hard. You know you need to go at 10s, etc. Whereas in a 50 over game, you might have all the shots, but there's so much more to lose if you play one at the wrong time. And it's quite interesting that I know the pitches played a part in it, but the last 3 50 over major finals and quite a lot of the semi-finals too have been really low scoring affairs. And the pressure must come into it.
Without a doubt. I mean, what NASA was on at the time, because again, it was Shreyas Iyer. He was talking about that. You've got all the shots in your locker. You have to really make good decisions as to when to use them. There is so much more time in the game. Run rates they don't fluctuate. They don't go up as fast as they do in T20 cricket, and you can't get them down as fast as you can in T20 cricket. And then Iyer runs down there. Who was it? He ran down the wicket to and just belted him. The biggest 6 of the tournament, 109 yards.
I think it was Phillips.
Was it? That's right, Phillips. And then went the very next ball, just as NASA's saying all this about making those calculations, making those decisions. He runs down and cloths one, and poor old Jameson drops him. So again, another moment where suddenly 5 down, you're still quite a long way away from home, and there it was illustrated pretty much as starkly as you like about the thought process or the mental knots that you can tie yourself into in run chases in the longer form of the game, whereby. In T20 cricket, there are much fewer decisions to make. It's kind of like I've just mashed one for 6. We still need 12s or whatever it is. The next one's got to go as well. And the jeopardy for losing those wickets is often not anywhere near as high as it is in 50 over cricket. So it was a really good final. I mean, I guess the thing that stopped it from being really good was because even in that period of the squeeze, you still felt as though India were going to have too much in terms of depth coming in and too few runs to have to make it really kind of, fingernail biting stuff. But having said that, you still have to get the job done.
Yeah, and then I think going back to just how good Rohit's innings was, if you look at the scorecard, Shubman Gill 31 or 50, and I know he didn't get a lot of the strike in the power play, but that's quite an uncharacteristic start from him. KL Rahul, who actually did bat really well, he said in the post-match interview straight up, I was shitting myself when I came in, which I enjoyed. I enjoy the honesty there. Danny on the Patreon asks, how fucking dangerous would New Zealand be if there was a billion of them rather, which is a very good question.
Yeah. I mean, it's the question of that, and one of the things that's always made New Zealand, to use that overused phrase, punch above their weight, is because they tend to dot the I's and cross the T's on everything. You think back to the 92 World Cup when they were the first team to sort of bowl off spin in the, who was it? It was Patel, wasn't it?
Yeah, Deepak Patel.
Deepak Patel. They bowled spin in the power play in the first 50 overs, and everyone sort of thought it was laughable, but was really successful for them. They've always made the very best of the resources at their disposal, and have kind of thought to the nth degree. And so you can say, and this happens often where teams might overthink things, but what that actually means is that you've come up with a plan and not everybody buys it. Right? That's what I think happens because there's nothing wrong with planning. There's nothing wrong with having an idea or a slightly different way of deciding to go about things. But your 11, your squad kind of has to buy into that being the way to go and kind of go at it 100%. I think what can happen is that you get planning, and some people think it's a great idea, and the other half of the team think it's a bit crap, and so the whole thing falls apart in terms of its execution. I don't think you can ever say that with New Zealand that they don't back the decision made either by the coach and the captain in tandem, or it might just be the captain, it might just have been Stephen Fleming, it might be Mitch Santner, and who's coach now for
Gary Stead.
Gary Stead. It never looks as though kind of like there's any dissent when they've decided to come up with something slightly different or go about the game in a way that is more planning than instinct. And again, which is not to say they don't have instinctive players, but because they do. But what they do tend to do is kind of buy into things 100%, and that's what makes them a very dangerous team.
And it's obviously hard to tell from the outside whether it's planning or reactive thinking, but they do seem to just react to what's in front of them very, very well.
Yeah.
How they went in the power play, how after they lost those 3 wickets, it was so clear the remit for the middle order players was just make sure we've got some wickets in hand for the last 10.
Yeah.
And on to the last 10 overs, Michael Bracewell.
But this is my point, you see. But if 2 of the batters in the middle order don't just like get a bit antsy about the idea that you're not going anywhere and decide to slog, the plan falls apart.
Yeah.
But if they kind of buy into it, we're not going to panic here. This is okay. All right. It's not ideal, but it's okay. We're still going to have the 10 at the end where we can try and make it to 260, 270, where they unfortunately failed to do that. But the plan was we're going to make sure that we've got wickets in hand, and nobody stepped out of that, which gave them a chance. It gave them a fighting chance. Whereas you say, perhaps with us, we might have sort of decided that's a good idea to begin with, and then thrown it out of thrown all of the baby and the bath water out, and kind of ended up being 200 instead of 250.
Michael Bracewell genuinely put in one of the all-time great ICC final performances, 53 or 40 with the bat, and then with the ball, 2 for 28 off his 10 overs, including that wicket of Kohli that really changed the momentum of the run chase. I know that everyone says New Zealand players are underrated, and quite often I think people underrate them just because they're just not watching them enough. But with Bracewell, I know why I don't rate him or didn't rate him. It was because he turned up here in the English summer 3 years ago. He was 31 years old, a guy who averaged, his averages were the wrong way round, basically, in first class cricket. Averaged 30 with the bat, 40 with the ball. And my main memory from that tour was him just getting pulverised by Bairstow at Trent Bridge. And didn't really see him for a while, injured for a while. Then he comes to this tournament. He was totally amazing. But Ben, he was so good.
Yeah, and he does have this habit. He does it about like once or twice a year of just playing the best, of having the game of his life. And so he's had about 5 of them.
So it's a really handy knack to have.
Exactly. Yeah, like I remember one against Ireland in an ODI series that Ireland maybe should have won the series, and Bracewell is 140 off 70 or something in a chase, doing it in the last over, which is kind of like, like sort of all-time great stuff, but it's like, but he's only doing it every so often, and yet, like,
what's wrong with that?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, what's wrong with playing one good innings in a chase in your life? Yeah, so.
I don't see a problem with that. You?
But I guess also, like, he was brilliant. But I guess the thing as well is, like, actually to have that many just finger spin bowling all rounders, like, England would just kill for a few more of those, basically, and especially in this tournament.
Yeah,
and I guess that's something as well as is adjusting plans in game, definitely, but also actually to, get to a tournament and see the conditions ahead of you and say, like, okay, we're going to just slightly change our game plan because we see this how it's going to be in, bowling loads of spin. By the end of it, that was pretty decisive in the semi-final as well, was how much finger spin they were able to bowl. On the conditions, it was funny as well in the toss before the final, Shastri saying, like, to New Zealand, you've played here once before, so you must be well used to it.
That's very good. That's very good. A reminder that we're always busy on the Patreon. We're doing a monthly series at the moment, looking at different Ashes series. Each time last week, we looked back at the 1998-99 Ashes, one that Butch played in. Fascinating going back because it's comfortably the second best England have been in Australia in the last 35 years, which I know is not saying a lot, but it was a really good series. So if you're not getting involved, you're missing out. Just finally on the competition, it felt like the mask was beginning to slip a little bit in terms of how people are feeling about the general India slight advantages here and there that had happened over the course of a few tournaments. You had Gautam Gambhir, the India coach, very defensively saying in a press conference, people complaining are just perpetual cribbers. They've got to go up. But then Mohammad Shami, India's opening bowler,
about an hour later,
asked the same question, said, well, it has definitely helped us because we know the conditions and the behaviour of the pitch. It's a plus point that you're playing all the matches at one venue. And then you had South Africa's David Miller, asked about the final. He said that he'll be supporting New Zealand essentially because of how much travel South Africa, New Zealand and Australia had to do before the semi-finals because they didn't know where they were playing. And also you had the optics of the final itself. You had Jay Shah, who he gets a lot more airtime than his predecessor Greg Barkley does on TVs, and then you also had Shoaib Akhtar was very vocal in how it wasn't great that there was no Pakistani involvement in the presentation, given that this was a tournament that's supposed to be held in Pakistan. You can see why people outside of India don't like it, but I feel like one of the victims in all this is actually the Indian team, because they don't get quite as much credit as they would deserve if you didn't have the shenanigans that happened.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned it last week, didn't we? And I think it was even a talking point during the 23 50 over World Cup. You know, there was all that stuff about the pitches being changed, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember saying it then that, you know, if I was Rohit Sharma, I'd be going to whoever and saying, hey, listen, just let us get on with it. We know we can take care of this without the perception of any outside interference. And one thing's for sure, if you're the best team and you happen to have kind of like the easiest time of it in a tournament, i.e. you're not moving, you're not having to travel, you're not changing venues and all that kind of stuff, then you're going to win, right? I mean, you're probably going to win anyway. And so it does take a little bit of the gloss off it. Not that I'm not complaining about it. I think they were the best team. But what I'm saying is that if the outside perception is that every time we get to one of these world tournaments, that something is happening, or something is happening that sort of skews the tournament in favour of India, it doesn't kind of make for people being particularly delighted that they win the tournaments, despite how good they are. And I thought that whole thing, and yes, all the board signed up to it beforehand, but you also have to think that if you're any of the boards other than India, you're always deferring to the most powerful person in the room. Think current world events, if you like, as to what happens when you're the biggest player with the most clout, or whatever. Then people are very afraid to sort of step up and say, well, hang on, we're not having this. But it was, you know, Pakistan, having spent all that cash on redoing all the stadiums, you know, welcoming ICC tournament back to the country for the first time in goodness knows how long. They end up playing one match in Pakistan. The actual national team plays one match in Pakistan throughout the entire tournament, and the final gets played in a different country. It's kind of it's a slap in the nose. And there isn't another country in the world who would have enjoyed that situation, or felt that situation was correct and fair. And I think that's where we are at the moment. India are the best team. The politics around the world game at the moment are kind of, you know, are turning everybody off from enjoying what should be watching a fabulous bunch of players and a fabulous achievement from a brilliant country who love cricket more than any other.
Yeah. I guess what I find interesting is to know what sort of impact, say, Miller, how will they be responding to what Miller's said, you know, behind closed doors in the BCI, and whether they, like, you know, first one less is, you know, never mess with the cricketers' rest days. But also, like, I almost got the sense, you know, with Jay Shah, you know, brazenly doing that with that trophy presentation, being, you know, brazenly known from PCB, with his celebrations at the end of the semi-final win as well, whether there's almost a kind of like a what you're going to do about it sort of energy to it, that India are like, that now that they are, you know, the dominant cricket team, but also, you know, the far and away, it's been the case for a while, but really we're seeing the effects of it now being the powerhouse, you know, behind the scenes as well. And if there is a certain, like, they almost don't mind being quite outward with that. They're not going to be sort of like, you know, coy and say.
Bit of trolling going on.
Yeah, almost it feels like that a little bit to me. I mean, the one thing I would say in terms of not enjoying it, for the neutral, not enjoying India win, maybe it would have been the same with Australia winning, you know, 3 World Cups back to back, and you would have just liked seeing something
no
else.
one likes watching the same team win. Like, politics aside, that's just a consequence of what happens. It's a privilege to be that unpopular. You have to be really good to be that unpopular.
But I think the difference here is that the unpopularity is not directed towards the Indian cricket team and the cricket that they play. That's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
The unpopularity is pointed towards what appears to be an unassailable bias towards making things as easy for them as they are difficult for everybody else, you know. And that when the playing field kind of shifts to that degree, that's what upsets people.
That's it for part one. In part two, Harry Brook's decision to pull out of the IPL for the second year in a row. So Kane Williamson did not get his hands on the Champions Trophy, but one piece of silverware he might be getting his hands on in 2025 is the T20 Blast. Williamson will play a significant chunk of the summer for Middlesex at Lords. He will play at least 10 matches for Middlesex this summer. Middlesex play 4 of their Blast games here at Lords. The first game here is on May 27th. Adult tickets start from £33. There'll be dedicated tickets for under 25s that remain at £29 and under 16 tickets at £7. There are more savings on tickets for games with the Blast Pass and group offers, and all early bird pricing ends on May the 7th. Just as India were lifting the trophy, it was announced that Harry Brook will not take part in this year's IPL, having been signed by Delhi Capitals for nearly £600,000. In a statement, Brook said, "I know not everyone will understand and I don't expect them to, but I have to do what I believe is right, and playing for my country remains my focus and priority. I need time to recharge after the busiest period of my career." Today, I was looking back at Brook's commitments over the last 9 or 10 months since he returned to the game. So since May, he did Pakistan series at home, T20 World Cup, straight into the Test summer, straight into the 100, straight into the Australia ODIs, straight into the Pakistan away Test series. There was a brief gap in November, then the New Zealand Test tour, back for Christmas for a week or two, then the India White Ball Series, then the Champions Trophy. And if he was playing the IPL, he'd have gone straight to the IPL, then straight into the English summer. It's a pretty big statement from basically the hottest property in English cricket.
Yeah. Also, there's the subtext of a new white ball captain for England as well, and you wonder, whether or not he's been tipped the wink that perhaps it might be him. But you know, you reeled off all of the commitments that he's had since taking that break last winter, and it's been very much full on, and it doesn't change. You know, this summer is going to be huge. 6 Test matches, 5 against India, the Zimbabwe Test in May. Before that, various white ball commitments that he will be involved in as well up until that point, and then the Ashes. So if you're going to take a break, I mean, England fans will be saying good on you, you know, hats off, because I think they get quite sick of players saying, "Oh, I need a bit of a rest," and you don't see them playing for England when they've spent 2.5 months at the IPL. So you know, it'll be a popular decision among the fans and supporters here. But I just think, you know, even if he ends up pulling a 2-year ban, because obviously they've changed the rules, they got sort of quite sick of players signing up, going through the auction process and then pulling out on the eve of the tournament, which is absolutely their right to do, and you don't blame them for that whatsoever. I think at the age that he is, he's got a lot of IPLs in him, and this could be sort of career defining. I think it's a sort of team defining thing, or a project defining summer for England and McCullum and Key and Stokes, etc. And so therefore, I think he's made the right call. And he'll make, he will make a lot of money playing for England. That's one of the great advantages, and we were talking about it before we came on air. One of the great advantages of being a capped, a contracted England player is that your compensation is very, very good. And it's part of something that I know that Rob Key and the ECB have been in long discussions about, right the way back in 22 when he took over, that if we're going to protect ourselves, protect the national team, the national sport from outside influences, we need to make sure that the players that we want and that we need are recompensed equably with those tournaments. And so that's basically what's playing out.
Yeah, it's still an extraordinary amount of money that he's potentially declining. If it's a 2-year ban, it's a £600,000 this year, and who knows what would be on in the 2 years following that. Ben, question from Guy on the Patreon, who says, given his withdrawal from the IPL, is Brook nailed on as white ball captain? I guess that's a particularly interesting question given the headlines generated last week from Rob Key's press conference, where most outlets led with the quotes around Ben Stokes. And I think Rob Key said in his typically forthright and open manner that England would be stupid not to consider the option of Stokes as ODI captain. How do you see it?
So I don't see it as him being nailed on. I do genuinely believe, I mean, it's not very long since they got back from the Champions Trophy. They'll have, some of them will have had a bit of a break and then they'll reconvene and discuss these things. I think what this is a signal of intent from Brook that he wants it in a way. He will be saying like, look at what I'm giving up because of how committed I am to England. And therefore I would like to be part of the leadership team. Not that it's a power play, but I think that this does show, I think that, obviously where his priorities lie, but I think that there's a bit of a point there as well that this is the thing that matters to him. And fair play to him. I think the thing as well in terms of the money given up is that like your currency as a cricketer is how good you are, and if you're putting yourself through a schedule that means you're not able to perform to your best, you're going to suffer financially as a result of that as well. And Brook will also look at how he's got his IPL deals in the past. He got this time was another, not as big a paycheck as his first one, but still a pretty hefty sum that he's now turning down. But he got that on the back of what he was doing in an England shirt, not what he'd done in the IPL. And so he will, if he's thinking financially as well, he'll think, if I play at my absolute best for England for the next 2 years, then I will be one of the best, batters in the world, and that includes in T20 cricket. And therefore I will, more than make up what I'm missing out on, rather than, burning myself out. And then, you see what can happen to cricketers when that happens. So I think actually from a financial point of view, it's playing a long game and it's taking a bit of a risk, but you're also backing yourself as a cricketer to be the best that you can. And that's sensible too. But yeah, from a captaincy point of view, I genuinely think they haven't made a decision, and that the all options on the table, I think that is true. I think we're probably seeing the fading away of a Billings Vince kind of character coming in.
That was only, you say fading away, and I know what you mean. Yeah. But I think that was in answer to the question, who are the people on the outside that you would consider. That wasn't who are they going to pick. Yes. I never thought. I didn't think for a second that was likely, and it's even less likely now, you would imagine.
Yeah, but it also just comes with the media speculation after any exit. It's kind of just give it Billings the end of the season when you're angry at being knocked out or something. And you sit back and like, no, actually, we do have some pretty good cricketers who have done decent jobs as captains and wouldn't be terrible options. So let's go for one of them. And I'd say it's refining down to Brook v Stokes, I guess. And then you'd think that Stokes at some point I can see as like a sort of a one-off thing as a captain down the line. But I think saying to him now, you need to play a lot of one-day international cricket between, when we've got everything else going on.
It's just mad. I mean, he's struggling to make it. Struggling to make it through to the end of whatever commitments that he's signed up for now.
It's only 9 days of extra cricket between now and the Ashes.
No, I get that, but it's also part of the reason why he stepped away from playing all of that type of cricket was so that he would be fully committed, fully fit, and fully ready to play in the 5-day series. So it just seems like for him, it seemed like an extraordinary volte-face to sort of go back on that and go with 10 Test matches against the two best and most powerful cricketing nations in the world coming up in a relatively short space of time, to sort of turn around and say, well, I'll take that on as well now.
Yeah, I also think for me the Stokes thing is more than just about where his body's at physically. I think England need to send a message of how seriously they're taking 50 over cricket. And basically, since 2019, the best players in inverted commas, other than Butler and Rashid, have missed a lot of ODI cricket. And Stokes has been one of the prime people who has missed a lot, even when he was unretired from the format. So I think a prerequisite for who's captain, they have to play absolutely everything unless there's a direct clash. And I'm not sure, from what we've seen of Stokes and what he's opted out of in the last couple of years, that is that likely to happen if it is Stokes, whereas Brook is much more likely, I think, to play everything. But yeah, it is just interesting looking at Stokes' calendar for the next 12 months. I get your point that they're playing 11 Test matches of huge importance. He has a massive gap between the end of the India series and the Ashes. It's end of July to late November. He basically has 3.5 months off from playing cricket. And there's one quite interesting tour, the one to New Zealand in October. That's not the worst to go on before an Ashes tour. 6 white ball games, 3 ODIs and 3 T20s. So maybe that he's back in the fold, but not as captain.
But not as captain, yeah. That's possible, yeah.
That's it for part 2. We will be back shortly. So we're currently conducting a Wisden Readers Survey and we want you to take part in it. We're offering 4 tickets to the England-India Women's ODI game here at Lord's on July 18th, as well as the painter Andrew Redden's brilliant Little Master painting. Only takes a few minutes to complete. Either scan the QR code on the screen now or find the link in the description from below. Lots of news from the last week. Will Smead has signed an all-format deal with Somerset, 2.5 years after going white ball only.
Well done. Very good.
Mel Farrell interviewed him on our pod a few weeks ago where he very much hinted that was the way he was going to go. I'd recommend going back to that if you're interested in his story. Steve Smith and Mushfiqur Rahim have retired from ODI cricket. Mushfiqur does so as Bangladesh's second highest run scorer in the format, 7,795 runs in an ODI career spanning 19 years. Smith bows out, having played a gem of a knock actually in the semi-final that we didn't talk about. Looked $1 million against India spinners and then missed a full toss. He looks really good at the moment. He looks really, really good.
Yeah, I'm surprised by this decision, to be honest. And retirements are all the rage these days. I wonder if, come to that World Cup and he's still, as good as he is in Test cricket, if that revival is as genuine as it looks like being. I still think as that kind of that accumulator anchor in the mid-Lord and ODIs, he is still one of the best in the world as he has been for a little while, and the best that Australia have. He's not, as I said, he's younger than David Miller, who I think is not thinking about retiring at all. And also Australia are, they're very happy to rest their key stars and to give goes for the people and then go back to them when a World Cup rolls around. That's how they kind of, won that 3 in a row by being, not great in between, and then the big boys show up and then they go and win them. So I'm a bit surprised by it. I mean, presumably he's thought about it and thinks this is what he needs to do to get through what is, also an intense period for them, but is a bit surprising to me. And he has been exceptional. You look back on those World Cup wins, and he wasn't, because he was never the face of Australian white ball cricket, so he was the face of Australian Test cricket, but he played some exceptional knocks. I mean, another semi-final against India back in 2015, when he was brilliant, and yeah, it fades into the background compared to him being the best since Bradman in Test cricket, but it's been a very good ODI career too.
Yeah, I was surprised as well, just because Australia rest their best players so often. There's probably no country takes out their most important players out of the firing line and rest them up quite like Australia does. So feasibly, he wouldn't have to play that much before the 27 World Cup. I don't know, maybe it says something about how he's viewing his future Test career as well. I'd sort of always presumed he'd view the 27 Ashes as unfinished business. That Australia side's never won a series in England, but maybe he's not looking that far ahead. Some news in Pakistan. I know it's always chaotic in Pakistan, but this week's been something else. So in a press conference last week, interim head coach Aqib Javed suggested that Pakistan's instability is perhaps holding them back. He said, this is a genuine quote, and I think it's factually correct as well. We've had 16 coaches and 26 selectors in the last 2.5 years. Anyone would struggle in these circumstances. 16 coaches and 26 selectors.
You saw the Gillespie sort of counters to all of that. So I was saying, well, it's a bit rich coming from somebody that was actively trying to oust the people who've just been appointed as coaches, and that basically that's what happens. There's a cabal of former players and whatever who are always sort of just like stirring the pot and trying to get rid of the incumbent so that they can take over. And if you have the sort of turnover that they've had, it's difficult to see that isn't the case.
Yeah, I mean, Gillespie called him a clown.
Yeah, it's all good fun.
But it is extraordinary the upheaval in Pakistani cricket. I mean, Aqib Javed is now like basically the boss of Pakistan cricket at the moment. In the summer, he was the Sri Lanka bowling coach. It's a remarkable ascendancy to power.
He was Kalander's head coach in the PSL, who won it twice on the trot and then finished dead last, I think, last year. I mean, it's wild. It's really difficult to keep up with. I mean, you'd think it wasn't long ago that Mickey Arthur was sort of director of cricket while still being head coach for Derby at the time. So it's not exactly a litany of great decision making over the last 5 years.
There was a very funny bit on commentary during one of the Pakistan games. Certainly, it was in Pakistan, and Ramiz Raja was on commentary, and his co-commentator essentially asked him about all the pitch stuff they did in Pakistan, because Ramiz Raja saw how flat they were.
He was director of cricket for a while, because he was out of the commentary box, and then once he lost that job and ended up back in again.
Yeah, but it was really interesting him saying we had to bring in this soil from Australia, and that took a long time. And by the time the soil came, I was no longer PCB chair.
That is funny.
So Salman Ali Agha is the new T20 captain. And again, this does just point to more chaos, unfortunately. He's only played 6 games in the format, currently has a strike rate of 80, and until last year couldn't get a game in the PSL, didn't play a single game in the 22 and 23 competitions. And I think Shaheen's been dropped from the ODI side.
Well, they've dropped Babar and Rizwan from the T20 side as well.
Rizwan gone.
The other thing as well is that Salman Ali Agha is a brilliant ODI player. Actually, if you switch him and Rizwan around as captains of the 2 formats, that might make some sort of sense. The way they've gone, they've dropped the only 2 guys who ever score any runs in T20 cricket, no matter what rate they score them at. They're the only guys who average more than 25 or so. Gone for a guy whose record is a lot worse than that, and a lot of those games were against Zimbabwe as well. So it's you can't even say that he's been playing against the highest quality opposition going. The Akib Java thing as well, just quickly, is that he's sort of the boss, but it was amazing how temporary the release and naming the squad made him sound, which I guess he is, saying he remains in temporary placement and we are actively looking for another guy. Being like, we don't have anyone right now, but it's not this guy. That's the one that we know is not this guy. But then, and they love flip-flopping between, there's like, no, we need a foreign coach, we need an outside voice who challenges Pakistan orthodoxy, and that's going to be the way we go forward. And then the foreign coach comes in and the results and everyone's like, we need a guy who knows the system, knows the players, and who can just, who gets Pakistan cricket, and then it goes, and that's the cycle again. And it's complete chaos. Because I was trying to make notes being like, who's been out of each squad, and I basically eventually gave up being like, who's dropped, who's rested, who's going to be, back in the fold in 6 months' time. It's almost not worth dwelling on anything from a cricket point of view, because like by the time you've worked it out, it's all changed again. The soil's yet to arrive. It's
the soil's on its way.
Elsewhere in Pakistan, there was an amazing bit of drama in the President's Trophy final, first-class competition, where Saud Shakil was timed out. I think the first player in the history of Pakistan first-class cricket to be timed out. Initially, there were rumours that he'd just fallen asleep during a collapse. But journalists have since reported that people close to Shakil have clarified he was not asleep, but rather preoccupied in the bathroom, which I find an amazing clarification to make publicly. Stick with the sleep story. It's so much better. It's so much better.
Couldn't find something, anything, but he was, oh no.
They lost 4 wickets and 3 balls, didn't they, because of the timed out?
Yeah.
So
they lost more wickets than deliveries bowled, which is tremendous.
Amazing.
Impressive stuff.
Questions from the listeners to finish. So this is from Henry on the Patreon. He says, Phil and Butch reminiscing on Peter Such on last week's Patreon episode really got me thinking that the current crop just don't have the conditions to get 800 plus first-class wickets. How do we sort out the spinner situation in English domestic cricket? I guess the question I had following this was, what has changed from your playing career, late 90s, early 2000s, where you had bowlers like Such, who were spinners who played a bit for England, but not loads, who had taken about 1,000 first-class wickets, to now? What were the major changes?
Well, Peter Such would have played a lot of 3-day cricket in that. I'm trying to think when it changed over. Was it 1991 that the county championship consisted of, the teams would play something like 21 first-class matches. Some of them were 3-day games, some of them were 4-day games. And Suchi was of a vintage whereby he would have played a lot of 3-day cricket before 4-day cricket. Now, in the 3-day games, there will be a lot of people who listen to this who remember 3-day cricket very fondly. You would have a lot of declarations, a lot of last innings run chases, a lot of stuff whereby you weren't necessarily bowling 30, 40 overs a day to try and to try and force a game open. The game was open already, and you would pick up your wickets from that. They'd play on a lot of outgrounds too back in the old days. I reckon, I'm trying to think when that sort of stopped. I remember playing at Stockton-on-Tees in a 4-day game against Yorkshire. I bowled off spin in that game. They turned. So you'd play, at Essex, for example. Such he played at Nottingham, in Leicester, and at Essex. So at Essex, you'd play at places like Ilford and Colchester that really spun. They had festival weeks, and you'd play on a lot of pitches where the spinners bowled a lot of overs.
You still see that. So there's a game at Blackpool last year between Lancashire and Durham, and it turned loads.
Yeah, but that would be the norm. There'd be a lot of that would happen through the summer. All the counties, you'd have your outgrounds that you'd play a lot of cricket at, and those outgrounds basically favoured spin quite often. And so the conditions in terms of the cricket played, back to 3-day cricket, you have to bowl, I think it was 110, 115, maybe even 120 overs a day in those games. So you had to bowl spin. You had to, just to get through them. Otherwise, you'd be playing at midnight. Playing a lot of outgrounds. Lots and lots. I mean, what are we playing now? 14 championship games in a season. So at that time it was 21. So you kind of, you're killing your fast bowlers. So you would just naturally bowl a lot of spin, and you'd play a lot of outgrounds where the ball turned. So all of those factors put together meant that, most counties, I mean, part of the reason why Surrey were, if I go back to my own club, had a 29, 28 year sort of barren run, in terms of winning championships, was that they'd have lots really good seam bowling attacks. They'd got guys like Sylvester Clarke and Martin Bicknell and stuff in their youth. But come sort of June, July, the fast bowlers were on their knees and didn't necessarily have the strength in terms of like a double spin pair to kind of carry you through the rest of the season. Whereas Middlesex, very successful 80s, early 90s, was Edmonds Embry or Embry Tufnell. You'd have Childs and such at Essex. Every club had maybe a dual spin, right arm off spin, left arm orthodox, as a matter of course. And you'd come across a lot of them playing in second team cricket as well. It was just something that every club had, spinners of varying quality, but there were a lot of them around.
And now so much of the season is played in April and May as well. So very little of the season is actually played in the summer, the peak summer months. Yeah,
and you would, so also just bring that. So I went from, when I made my debut, it was 110 overs a day, right? So you'd have 2.25 hours, 2.25 hours, and then just an unlimited amount of time to finish off the overs at the back end of the day. You just keep going till the overs were bowled. And you were playing 17 championship matches a year, and then obviously it went to 2 divisions, so you'd play 16 or whatever it might be, and now they're playing 14. So there's a lot less cricket. All of it is 4-day cricket, which is absolutely the way it should be. And so you very rarely get these occasions where you've kind of set somebody a 90 over or a 70 over run chase and whatever, and there are wickets being taken and given away. So the numbers come down in terms of wickets taken. If you're taking wickets, you're bowling teams out. You know what I mean? As a general rule. And all of these factors, time of year that it's being played, less outgrounds, all of these type of things kind of mean that the amount of overs that spinners bowl, and therefore the amount of impact they have on first-class cricket, is much diminished from the way that it was back in the day. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, just 2 more things. I mean,
2 more.
I don't know the guy that has this answer for everything, but I think that the rise of seam bowling over the last decade means that even if, that there are obviously lots of other things that means it's maybe a bit harder to bowl spin, but even if they're exactly the same, then the equation just changes in terms of, if you can just give it to, a jobbing seamer, but they're going to take wickets at 22, then that's what you're going to do. The other thing I know you're big on this, Yas, is the rise of the reverse sweep as just a standard shot that all bowlers play, or that all batters play. That does just make it like that change the equation as a finger spinner when the ball isn't turning low. Before that, there was if you set the field right and you can bowl the ball in an area, then you could sort of tie a bat down. Whereas now there's just that extra scoring area that's kind of opened up.
People are a lot more respectful to it, I think, then as well. I mean, again, so there's a third thing then. So, the advent of T20 cricket in 2003, suddenly, the spinner can get bullied. Everybody, all batters have the ability, pretty much, to kind of to take them down, and therefore, particularly in 4-day cricket, we're keeping. So, here's another thing about 3-day cricket. I remember having this chat with my old man. Was that it wasn't necessarily a bad thing to go at quite a high run rate when you were bowling. You were taking wickets, but you were going at 5, 6s or whatever. It just put more time in the game for everybody, to try and get a result in 3-day cricket. In 4-day cricket, you're really upset if you're going at that many, because you've lost control of the match, given that there is so much more time in the game. And so, the idea being, I remember, being captain, you'd kind of be aiming for sort of 3s threes was just kind of like this. There's your sweet spot. We'll keep the run rate down to that. And so therefore, if your spinners are going at more than that and they're getting battered a little bit, they're just out of the attack straight away, and you go back to a more containing style of seam bowling. So the change in the way that the cricket has been played means that unless you're very, very good, the opportunities or the willingness for a captain to throw you the ball for an extended amount of time is also shortened as well.
Yeah, it's a cycle where lots of things feed into it. So if you look at the wicket-taking charts in the summer, April and May dominated by seamers, and the spinners, the best spinners, sort of catch up towards the end. So a Simon Harmer or a Liam Dawson, Jack Leach figure, they sort of catch up towards the end. But because teams stack their bowling attacks with seamers for the first 2 months of the season, the young spinners just are not bowling as many overs as they used to as well. So they're just not getting as much an opportunity to develop. And you actually see a lot of really talented young spinners who are hyped up out of the game by 26, 27.
Last year, certainly won the championships for 3 years on the trot and have barely played a spinner.
Played a frontline spinner, yeah.
Which was unthinkable back at my time, because the pitch is just you'd get killed if you tried to do that. But it's been successful for them.
There are very, very few specialist spinners who get into red ball sides just in their bowling. I think you're almost as likely to be out of the game by 30 or playing for England if you're a specialist spinner who doesn't have a second string to their bow. Finally, Bradley from our Patreon asks, on COVID Reflection Day, he asked this yesterday, what do you think is COVID's biggest legacy impact on the game? And do you think cricket was impacted by the pandemic more than other sports? Ben, do you want to take this?
Wow. I mean, I haven't hugely thought about how much COVID's impacted other sports. So I'd hesitate to say if cricket has been more or less impacted. But I mean, it has certainly been hugely impacted. And actually, I think, you can trace baseball, for example, back to COVID, back to the lack of joy that players were feeling for a time, sort of going in those bubbles. I guess one thing that cricket had specifically was that because tours are so long and because games are so long, is you have to, during COVID, you had to be bubbled up for a long period of time. You couldn't sort of come in and out of it. You won't know, if you're not saying it's easy for football, if you turn up, play 90 minutes and go home, but there's a bit more where you can kind of, if you get all the testing right, whereas with cricket, it's just so you had to, that's why the bubble thing was, I think, more keenly felt in cricket versus other sports. And I guess the other thing is that, and this would probably go across several sports, but it's just heightened the financial realities for several countries, and then perhaps therefore, accelerated the rise of India sort of as the power within the game, because you have say with South Africa in the SA20, that's them sort of basically renting out their summer to India, to the IPL, and getting a big cash injection because of it. The need for that and having to go so much to 6 teams all IPL owned, doing TV schedules around Indian audiences is driven a bit by the fact that they were in such dire financial straits, which was obviously pushed forward by COVID. I think you see this in other places as well. So those would be on-field legacies. I'd say would be baseball, and off-field would be the financial side of things.
And I think related to that, I think what COVID did is, because you had that backload of series that had to be played that weren't played during the pandemic, and it made people question, why do we play these series, right? And there were some series in particular. England had a few of these. Bangladesh away a couple of years ago. There was that Australia series just after the T20 World Cup. There was a tour of South Africa, white ball tour of South Africa, that it felt like no one wanted to be on. It had people question, why are we playing these series? And the answer is broadcast agreements. And I think people have just got a little bit more curious as to questioning why series happen. And I think I think especially now we have more white ball global tournaments and more franchise leagues, I think it's made people question bilateral cricket a lot more than it did pre-pandemic.
I mean, from my job's point of view, it kind of gave the TV production companies, said, well, why are we spending all this money sending people to go and do games live when you can sit them in front of a telly and have them do it? That's been a massive legacy of it. I think also the tours were getting shorter anyway, but they're even shorter now, I think, because they realised that you could kind of, I don't think it's done the game any good, but you can cram all of these things into a much shorter time frame, because COVID showed that you could kind of get people in and out quickly as possible. Saliva on the ball. There's a real, that's something that has been done in the game forever and ever, and then COVID came along, and that's now banned. I don't know what you have to speak to some bowlers about how much that's changed the action and the buff that they can get on a cricket ball. But it's changed a lot of things. Not many that I would say were absolutely for the better.
Cool. Well, let's leave it there. That's everything for today's show. Cheers, Butch. Cheers, Ben. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. We will be back next Tuesday.